EU has, more than ever before, been struggling between an increasing urgency of demonstrating its commitment to candidate countries and accelerating their accession on the one hand, while on the other hand, maintaining a focus on the fundamental values that underpin both its own existence as well as its enlargement policy. At the same time, against the backdrop of eroding respect for the rule of law and principles of liberal democracy, in several candidate countries, it appears that these two interests are increasingly in tension with each other. In this panel, we aim to provide some fresh ideas on how the EU can best respond to the challenge of pressing on with the enlargement agenda all the way to actual membership for its candidates, while ensuring their transformation into credible member states, meaning member states that are governed by truly democratic governments, obedient of the rule of law and fundamental values that are enshrined in Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union. We will have first the keynote speech by Deputy Prime Minister of the Macedonian government, Mr. Bojan Maricic. He will set the tone for the panel discussion which will ensue right after his keynote. Mr. Maricic, you have around 7 minutes, up to 7 minutes. I will have to be strict. I'm sorry, it's nothing personal. I will have to be strict with the time. I will give you signs, wave at you when you come close to the end of your time for the immediate interventions. Hopefully, despite being a little bit late with the start of the panel, we will be able to include the audience and have a bit of a discussion. Mr. Maricic, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Milena. Thank you for the opportunity. I'll try to set the tone, although the topic is already telling and setting the tone. I'll try to find a definition of how to look the enlargement policy through the new lenses of geostrategy or geopolitics. But also I'll try to explain what are the flows of and potentials and flows of this perception through the example of North Macedonia. Finally, after some time, we are again using the geopolitical arguments in the enlargement policy, but it was always there. And I think this was part of the problem with the missing momentum for enlargement, missing of the geopolitical and geostrategic dimension. Of course, we all regret that it happens because of the Russian aggression to Ukraine, but it is there and we need to grasp it and we need to take the moment of the lessons learned in order to move forward in the positive direction. When they asked me, and I had the chance to discuss with some of you at the bilateral meetings, and they asked me what are the shortcomings of the region except for that we need a better rule of law and the judicial system, and fight against corruption, of course. I say the main shortcoming of the Western Balkan region is that we are not facing the Black Sea, so we don't have a shore on the Black Sea, and that we are not neighbors of Russia. Otherwise, for sure, that we would be members of the European Union by now, and that's a fact. But when they also ask me, are you serious? What are the shortcomings of this region? And I say, the shortcomings of the next shortcoming of the region is probably the fact that we are bordering with all the European Union member states. Because if we would border with Russia, we would have much better geostrategic position. It is a joke, but it's not a joke on the other hand. And I also said to some of my colleagues that North Macedonia is lucky because we have only two neighbor states, two neighbors that are member states of the EU. If we had more, we would need to do even more changes of the constitution. It is a joke, but it's not. So what is the geostrategic meaning of the Western Balkans for the European Union? That is the question that we need to answer. The Thessaloniki promise needs to be reconsidered and needs to be reinforced once again, but with a specific plan. So we need a plan for accession and a plan for more money, for more reforms, and a plan for how to get closer, how the EU can get closer to the Western Balkans, but also how can Western Balkans get closer to the EU, and we need it this summer We don't need it next summer, we don't need it in 5 years, we need it now. North Macedonia was the most pro-European country in the region. We were always the Euro optimists by 90%, 95%. In the past 3 years, this has decreased rapidly, to surprise to all of us, but it's telling, from 85% to 65%. This is something that pushes us to rethink what are we doing wrong. On our side, we need a clear reform agenda that will overcome all the political parties and all the needs of the political parties and ideological differences. Because this is something that goes beyond any politician as an individual, any political party as a structure, and any government in one term. This is why we need to improve the structure of the functioning of the parliament, because there the parliament should be the center of the point where the opposition and the government can work together on the European integration. The group of experts that we present and will present very soon as part of the core team should be with high credibility and accepted by all parties. And of course, the agenda that is set up together, all the roadmaps, all the action plans, everything we do must be accepted by all the parties and not used in a daily political business, because now it is. I would also discuss about the elephant in the room, the constitutional amendments, as an example through which we need to see the strategic momentum. You know, if there was no strategic momentum, probably these constitutional amendments would take much longer time to discuss and to go through and to contemplate, because for Greece, for the Greek problem or the bilateral issue with Greece, it took decades for us to take the decision. But now we don't have those decades to lose anymore. So our main argument is that we have lost a lot of time. We don't need to waste any single second, and that over time the problems, the issues are not vanishing, are not going away, but they're becoming bigger and bigger. So this is why I think that the task of the government and the parliament is to do the constitutional amendments as soon as possible, and we are working on touching every corner of the society in order to get them on board, because it is not only about changing the constitution, it is about our investment in and our responsibility for the European future of our country. So the lesson is that it is really worth it to do for all countries in the region, to do difficult decisions and to make difficult resolutions, but that needs to be rewarded and recognized by the European Union. This is the second part of the story. So even when we approach to convince people that do not believe that this is a good idea, the constitutional amendments should be enacted now, maybe that they should be enacted in 10 years' time when we become members of the EU, or maybe just before the membership.
Is an odyssey through Dublin, a novel so intrinsic to our capital that Joyce said, if one day Dublin suddenly disappeared from the earth, it could be reconstructed out of my book. But the greatest Irish novels were not written in Ireland. In its final words, Molly Bloom's "Yes, I Said Yes" are but Trieste, Zurich, Paris, 1914, 1921. A reminder of Ireland's long history of emigration, but also of how deeply the Irish identity is. 50 years ago, alongside the UK and Denmark, Ireland benefited from first enlargement of the EU, or the European communities as it was then. Our accession was itself an odyssey. We had first applied in 1961. Back then, many doubted our suitability. We were too poor, too backward, too unstable, but we continued to reform chapter by chapter. In half a century since, through the EU, Ireland has opened to the world, importing not just capital, but culture, welcoming not just industry, but ideas, transforming demographically from a nation of immigration to one today where 1 in 5 of our residents were born overseas. We believe strongly that every European deserves the chance to follow this same path. That is why we have always been amongst the strongest advocates of enlargement. In 2004, as our presidency, we hosted a Day of Welcomes, in which 10 new member states enriched our union. We're proud of the role we played then, and today we remain committed in supporting all those European prospective countries. Much has changed since 1973, and indeed since 2004, but the principles of our union remain the same. The EU is more than a common market. It's a community of peoples, a tapestry of cultures woven together through shared values. United in diversity is the EU's motto, a recognition that the breadth of our traditions is not our weakness, but strength. That by coming together, our states do not dilute our sovereignty, but amplify our influence and our ability to tackle complexity. As the essayist H.L. Mencken noted, for every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. Populists proffer such answers, promising simple solutions and slogans, appealing not to evidence but to emotion, often fear, and all too often hatred. Openness and change demands it's simple. It doesn't always translate well onto Twitter. It's hard to emblazon on a baseball cap, but friends, it remains our only path to prosperity. Openness to the EU is the path that Irish people have travelled this past half-century, a journey we wish to see others take today, along with we are determined to help you. Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 has reinforced that determination. Underlying that, for the EU, enlargement is not a matter of political philosophy, but of geographical imperative. In Brussels, the question is not if, but when and how. How can we the EU meet this moment? How might we better support partners on the odyssey of EU accession? How do we recognise and reward political reforms while discouraging backsliding? As President von der Leyen stressed in Bratislava 2 weeks ago, it's not enough to say the door is open. We, the EU 27, need to do more to help you cross the threshold. While we await the details of the proposals from President von der Leyen, more in other words, but not less for less. Of course, candidates drive reform through the EU 27 to prepare to grow for membership. From budgetary implications to internal working methods, Ireland will play its full part in such a debate. But our immediate priority will ensure discussions remain focused on how to accelerate the enlargement, not distract from it. Finally, friends, Leopold Bloom's wanderings through Dublin spanned just a single day, but audacious voyage home lasted a decade. For most states, as for Ireland, the path to EU accession is as much an odyssey, but Brussels is not Ithaca. Important as the destination now is, the journey matters much, much more. Difficult as they are, reforms are their own reward. The chapters of enlargement, like the chapters of Joyce's masterwork, are often complex and indeed sometimes exhausting. But persevere. As an Irishman, a fellow European, I promise you it will be worth it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burke, for a very inspiring address and for stressing out the importance of the journey, the importance of the transformation on the way to the EU. Somehow, it seems that we have lost a little bit here in the Western Balkan region this idea what EU accession and EU integration is all about. That is it is about transforming the entire government system, the entire society, and that this journey is extremely important. But of course, there is also the importance of how the EU manages and governs its enlargement policy. Bojan mentioned the importance of actually understanding when we might expect enlargement to happen. There has been a lot of problems in the management of the entire enlargement policy, which has been quite discouraging for the region. So I would like to ask you, Mr. Dvorak, now, how do you perceive the credibility of EU's enlargement policy today? And how do you think that the EU should provide a renewed impetus, both for the old candidates, but also for the new candidates on the eastern flank, while at the same time, so using the geopolitical momentum, but at the same time ensuring that this transformative part of the whole story is not lost and that the democratic standards, rule of law standards are not only upheld, but further developed on the road to the EU?
Thank you for this nice question.
Very easy
Do
question.
you have any easier? You don't. Okay, the simple answer is it's pretty hard. But of course, I have started with, because I'm a proud member of the Czech government, I have to start with our Czech presidency last year, and I really believe that within this presidency we did a lot in this regard, and we really showed that our traditional politics towards Western Balkan is stable and doesn't change anything. It's set up by President Havel by very beginning, and we are proud and happy to follow his steps and his heritage in this area. You know that I have some personal consequences or relation to Western Balkan, and it is my favorite place. And also that's why I'm trying to help West Balkaners as much as I can, and now even as in a position of the member of the government. I'd like to just mention that we were involved in visa liberalization for Kosovo, we were involved in change of status of Bosnia, and others small, maybe not so much visible steps, we were able and happy to support this development. Then I have to say, and I'm not so proud about it, that I guess that us EU members and whole western part of the planet, our democratic part, are lost at least last 10 years in support and in this effort how to involve Balkaners in our life, in our splendid house, however you call it. I am not speaking about EU itself. I'm speaking about to be together. And paradoxically, the Russian invasion changed. This was the game changer, changed our thinking. Not myself, not our leaders, but some politicians and statesmen in Europe finally understood that we are under threat. And I'm very happy to be in society in which we are speaking about Russian invasion and Russian aggression and not about some special operation. Everybody understands what happened. Maybe we don't understand it in general because, in fact, it's simply not just aggression against Ukraine, against any sovereign free country. It's aggression against our values, against democracy, and against freedom, basically, and about respect to human rights, etc., etc. And Ukrainians now, today, are dying under serving to these values. So what I'd like to say towards Western Balkan, finally, some people understood that this is a broad attack against us, including you, including Balkan, including associated trio or Eastern Partnership, whoever. And thanks God, we are saying in Czech everything bad is good for something else. And thanks God, this was some kind of changer in minds of many politicians, and they understood we have to do our best to support your aim, your dreams, your willingness to be a member of EU or EU house. And of course we should also change our politics, what is already going on. I believe I really appreciate to hear and to read the speech of President Macron, who showed that France finally is changing a little bit their attitude to Western Balkan, and this is also for me a very important sign that finally also our partners understand that this is something what we have to have in our minds and to support as much as possible. Last sentence, what I'm saying many times, and I'm really sure that it's true, our aim, our European aim, our goal is to keep you on our side and to show you some light at the end of the tunnel, because if not, we are losing young generation, which will escape, is already going on regrettably, and we are losing all this region, because if not us, who will care about it? We know that.
Thank you very much, Minister Dvorak, and from your intervention I will pick out the last part about the light at the end of the tunnel. For us in the Western Balkans, it's already been a very long tunnel. We're not big fans of big tunnels and long tunnels in this region, and I certainly hope that the light is already coming up quite bright and that we are approaching the end. But it will be extremely important for the EU indeed to show us that light again in the light of what Mr. Maricic said in the beginning. Ms. Miščević, Tanya, I'm turning to you now. Bojan mentioned the declining support even in the most pro-European country in the region traditionally. You are a minister in Serbia, which has traditionally had a more difficult political relationship with the EU, and where EU support in the general population was always a bit lower. The historical maximum was in 2009 when we got visa-free regime and we had 74%. Right now it's again less than 50%. What does this historically low popular support for EU accession in the region tell us? And where do you see the responsibility and the space for action in the EU institutions, member states? And on the other hand, where do you see the responsibility, and how should the governments in the region also treat this problem?
Thank you very much, Milena, and it is my pleasure to be here with all of you. Well, the short answer will be the connection of what Bojan, but also Martin and you said. The tunnel is too long, and we now cannot even see the end of the tunnel. Unfortunately. Saying that, it's actually the story that we are repeating for decades. When we try to explain to the European Union member states that the enlargement fatigue will raise the issue of the reform fatigue in the region, in each and every of the candidate country, because this is the eminent situation. I mean, it must result like this. Nobody wanted to listen. Now we are seizing the momentum that somebody else created after 20 years, or even more, 23 years, of the integration process for all Western Balkans. Strange situation. Of course that we are to be blamed. I mean, I'm not saying that we are scalped as a societies, as the institutions. We also faced a lot of internal struggles, internal problems, but also let's have in mind that the rule of law as the primary condition for each and every of us is very difficult to deeply establish and root as the strong institution of the society. For the Western European countries, it took them several centuries to reach that level. We don't need centuries, but we need time to properly establish all of those things. Then don't forget that we are coming out of the 90s. Whatever happened in the 90s in Europe, it was the war in Europe. Actually, Ukraine is not the first one. But the result out of that is that we still have our internal issues, our problem in the region, which we have to sort out. Not only because we are moving towards the European membership or the EU membership, but because of our normal life. That is also the problem. But the thing is that also we should skip a little bit or move a little bit from the partnership relation that we establish and we do have with the European Union to the more alliance type of relation. So we are without question mark the partners, but let's start play in the same team, if I may say so. So to fight the same battles, but in good terms, that the joint venture is Western Balkan to move towards the membership of the European Union, because the joint venture is to have Western Balkan inside the membership of the European Union. There is no energy policy, there is no transport policy, there is no environmental policy, not even common foreign security policy. Instead, or unless we are working together in achieving all of those policies. We are ready. We discuss, after this we are going to have our trilateral meeting to see how we can organize better ourselves. What are the areas that we could speed up the integration into the European single market or other policies? So we are ready to sit and discuss, but we need the alliance with you in order to speed up.
Thank you, Ms. Miščević, very much for stressing this importance of building up on the partnership relationship towards the relationship of alliance, and certainly everyone is hoping that all the countries in the region will become full allies of the EU in all of its battles in the coming period, which will certainly to a great extent boost the entire EU accession process, not only for Serbia but also for the entire region. I will turn to Ms. Duka now. Since we have already heard in several of the interventions some sort of a critical assessment also of how the EU has led its enlargement policy over the past 20 years and even more, as Ms. Miščević mentioned, I would like to ask you about your assessment of the effectiveness of the enlargement policy today in incentivizing those most difficult, most politically sensitive reforms, the rule of law, democracy, the fight against the corruption, etc. Do you believe that the process as is successfully delivering these incentives, or do we need a change?
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for your question. It's a pleasure for me to be here as well. I'll build upon what Bojan, Tanja, and you said. So this discussion is getting interesting. The question is almost made for Albania, because Albania is recognized in the region for one flagship reform, the so-called justice reform. Albanians are great supporters of joining the Union. Apparently, we are on the side of optimists. 30 years ago, when we started democratic changes, our slogan was, "We want Albania as Europe." 30 years later, the support from citizens for joining the Union is still 96%. And I saw a bit of decrease of support in other countries. Of course, there are waves in such support, but it's still it's set at 95–96%. What are these waves? 6 years ago, Albania invested ahead in the so-called justice reform. It implied constitutional reforms, difficult political consensus, backlogs in courts while we vetted the judges, and we had vacancies, belief and disbelief. But so far we can say it was worth it. It was worth it either from the prospect of European integration. Of course, it is also worth it from a national prospect. We believe that it was a recognition of such reform and other reforms as well to have triggered the opening of negotiations with Albania last year. So in this case, the system of recognitions worked. Interestingly so, these also invested in credibility within the country, besides, of course, in member states and the European Union abroad, since they granted us the opening of negotiations. In December 2021, we conducted a survey and we asked citizens, what do you think? Are we going to join the Union, and by when? 23% of respondents said we will never join the Union. So it was not worth it to ask them by when. A year later, in December 2022, we asked respondents, will we join the Union, and by when? Only 5% said will not join the Union. So from 23% of non-believers, we went down to 5% of non-believers.
Can I just ask you, what do you think that was the result of the policies of the Albanian government, or do you think it was more a result of the EU's enlargement policy mechanisms?
Well, it was both. It was both. As I said, we reformed and the negotiations were opened. We did constitutional changes, hard decisions, political fights, disbeliefs, beliefs, and so on. But
Thank you.
the negotiations were opened.
Obratit ću se na
6
crnogorskom
months
jeziku.
later, 18% of citizens
Države
completely
regiona su vrlo
changed
slične
their thought. So that
sa
was an
većinom
investment in credibility. It was
toga
both
što je
us and the
predsjednica
Union. It's an alliance,
Slavica
as Tanja said.
govorila,
We should
složio
not
bih
think
se,
otherwise.
s
But
tim
now
što
the
ja
question
dolazim
is,
iz države
should it
gdje
always
smo
be
mi
like
imali
this? A system
30
of
godina
recognitions to
neprekidne
make us
vlasti jedne
move
partije, jednog
ahead?
čovjeka.
Are we doing it for a medal, a recognition?
Naši
For sure
strani
not.
partneri,
For sure not. It should
pritom
not
mislim
be
na
a process of a
Evropsku
stick and a
uniju
carrot,
i
a stick
Sjedinjene
and a
Američke
carrot.
Države,
At a certain point,
su problem
you
korupcije
probably
u
get
Crnoj
fed
Gori
up of eating
nazivali
the
i
carrot as
zvaničnim
well.
dokumentima
You
da
can't
se
stand the
radi
stick,
o
that's for sure,
endemskoj
but
korupciji.
probably you get fed up of eating the carrot as
Znači
well.
korupcija
So I
koja je
think
ušla u sve pore društva.
we should not do it for this
visokom nivou i
recognition.
na
And I would
nižem
draw the
nivou
attention in another shortcoming of
zdravstvo,
challenge,
prosveta,
or challenge we have, as Bojan was saying at start.
urbanizam,
I think our
sve su to
major
bile bol
challenge
tačke
is
s
the
kojima se
convergence
Crna
gap.
Gora
It's
susrela.
not just about reforms in paper and in practice and about recognition. It's about the gap in living standards. The citizens of the Western Balkans live at 1/3 of the standards of the developed member states and 50 to 60% of the standards of the lastly joining member states. So the gap is big. We don't do it for the recognition itself. We do it to narrow this gap. But such gap can't be narrowed probably just by us reforming. We need the Union to come across us. We need to come and move towards each other and bridge through the gap. There are good signals in this regards. We have seen the President of the Commission talking about a new growth plan for the Western Balkans that is about convergence and coming closer, and we will continue to talk about this after this panel as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Duka. And I'm sure that we all have many questions after the speech of the President of the European Commission. We're all trying to unpack it, decipher it, and whatnot. But in the meantime, I would like to turn to Ms. Holm-Pedersen. Many in the region have feared, since Ukraine and Moldova received candidate status last year, many in this region have feared that somehow now Ukraine, especially because of the horrible war that they're waging, that they will get special treatment or that they will somehow be allowed to skip steps in the reform processes on the way to the EU. In this case, we again see this growing tension between the geopolitical imperative, the need to support Ukraine, the need to offer them a credible perspective, to keep up their enthusiasm and the pro-European sentiment. But at the same time, there is this other part of the tension, the need to really withhold the rule of law and the democratic standards. So how do you see this tension playing out here in the region vis-a-vis in the eastern flank of Europe?
Sorry, could I have an easier question? I'm not sure.
Can I change the question?
Lift it up? I can try. That might help the answer. Does that work?
Let's see. I don't know. Yes, they're coming. If not, try this one. Thank you. No.
There we go. Partnership and alliance.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
There we go. International cooperation. Starting out, I think, as it's a pleasure anyway to speak after one of the most recent presidencies and one that's not too far into the future. And both ministers of Ireland and the Czech Republic have already set the context, which is, yes, the geopolitical landscape has changed. And it's also made it very clear that it is vital that we strengthen our partnerships with our nearest neighbors. And this is not just about open doors, but also really about reinforcing our engagement by whatever word we want to put on it. But enlargement, in a sense, has always been a geopolitical project. And Minister Burke was alluding to it, that really since the beginning, almost from the founding treaty of, the Treaty of Rome, there was a clause in there about any European state who wishes to join and may apply, and this notion that we would make it a project. And it certainly became stronger. The Copenhagen criteria turned 30 next week, exactly a week from today. And they are, again, unchanged. They're unchanged for a very fundamental reason, which is that joining the Union involves taking on responsibilities and obligations. It involves coming into an internal market that eventually, with a single currency, with a body of law that is growing. You can run Wikipedia or anything else, but probably just the legal acts and legislation of the Union counts to over 1 billion words or several 100,000 pages, et cetera, et cetera. So carrying the obligations of membership and with being able to be a resilient partner in a single market, that is one of actually the second biggest in the world, that is the reason why we have set all of these, in a sense, standards that have accompanied the enlargement process and the accession negotiations for almost 30 years. So that is, in a sense, the balance between, on the one hand, the strategic choice to join the European Union, and it is a strategic choice, and it is a geostrategic choice, as we see right now, as Ukrainians are literally dying for their right to choose. But it's also a practical challenge in order to be ready to withstand and benefit from all that the Union is. And so I think that would be my first reaction to your question, that there is and you alluded to it, that it's not about carrots and sticks, it's not about badges or acknowledgements, it's fundamentally about being ready. And it's equally for the European Union a process of being ready to deal with the widening of our membership and living up to that aspiration that's written into the treaties, that any European state that fulfills and implements and promotes the principles upon which we are founded may apply. But then we too need to make sure that the Union can continue to function effectively as we go forward. And these are the balances to be struck. And I would be significantly out of my pay grade if I were to venture answers to many of these questions. But it is that balance to be struck between, on the one hand, carrying the obligations for membership, the Union being able to continue to function and develop effectively as we grow, and finding a way to strengthen the partnership that I hear from everybody around here that we want with the Western Balkans, and making that neighborship an even stronger, call it alliance. And I think some here have alluded to big flagship initiatives from European leaders. It is definitely the hot topic of the year. And I think I'll leave it for here.
What was implied in your answer is that the Copenhagen criteria and all of the conditionalities are in fact in place not just to protect the EU, but also to protect the countries that are joining the EU, to protect their markets, to make sure that they can withstand all the pressures in the internal market. And then could I understand from your response that some sort of a fast-track procedure is not in the cards for any candidate, that the application of the Copenhagen criteria and clear conditionalities is there to stay for all candidate countries?
I think what I would say is simply this, that the Copenhagen criteria has stood the test of 30 years so far, and over time, in different revised methodologies and updated methodologies on how to implement them and how we negotiate the chapters, there's been a degree of embellishment. I think it is quite clear that the playing field is level. Everybody will be held to the same.
Not only to the east, of course, also to the Western Balkans. And Slovenia always supported the enlargement towards the Western Balkans, and we will continue to do so in the future. And when it comes to all sorts of mechanisms, initiatives, also things that you mentioned before, Slovenia will always support all sorts of things which would bring Western Balkans closer to the EU. So be it the accelerated, gradual approach, staged approach, tailor-made measures, positive conditionality within the revised methodology, or even talking about the dates. I mean, whatever it takes to bring the region closer to the EU and make the process of enlargement faster and credible at the same time. Now, we should, as was said before, all realize that, yes, the moment is actually now. It's not in 1 year, it's not in 2 years, it's not in 5 years. And if talking about the dates, 2030 or whatever date you want to talk about, if it helps this realization, then let's discuss it. I don't know, but whatever helps the realization that the moment is now and that we need to act as soon as possible. It was also mentioned before, it's 20 years since Thessaloniki. It's almost 20 years since 10 new members joined the European Union in 2004. But at this point, I would mention another aspect of that, which was also mentioned before by some of the colleagues. It's when our countries were joining, so the process that lasted until 2004, we had this, I would say, lasting internal political, social consensus about joining the EU. So we argued about everything. We argued about reforms, how to do this, how to do that. Sometimes went separate ways, but we never lost this strategic sight of joining the EU. I'm not saying that the countries in the Balkans have. I'm just saying that this is really important. Without this internal cohesion, it's almost impossible to achieve this goal. And as I said, Western Balkan countries should also work on this goal, because this is the only way how you can make bold decisions. This is the only way how you can make difficult decisions, be it changing the constitution, aligning the views on Russia, be it fighting against organized crime or corruption, or making a step back in the escalating situation somewhere else. Everything takes a big decision within the country and this internal consensus. Just to wrap up, Slovenia will try to do everything that we can not to leave Western Balkans behind. We will, of course, talk to our partners, as we always do, to look fairly at the achievements of the countries in the Western Balkans, on their progress, and also to point out all this geostrategic and political thinking. But in the end, the homework must also be done by the countries themselves. So let's talk a bit less and work a bit more. This would help us all. Thank you.
Very good message for the end. Let's talk less and work more. For us, talking is working, unfortunately, in this case. So let's keep talking. And I turn to Simonida now. There have been several proposals, and Mr. Frangesh mentioned some of them on reforming the enlargement process and making it more incentivizing, making it more dynamic. And I would like to ask you, from the Macedonian perspective, where do you see the benefits and where the risks of another tweak of the enlargement policy? And to what extent do you feel that if such a tweak or such a reform would not meddle and would not obstruct the actual accession negotiations process, but would deliver on, for example, what Mr. Maricic spoke about, more funds for more reforms, or more integration as a result, as a reward for more reforms, or better preparedness for EU accession. If the reform of the enlargement process would add that element without obstructing or without delaying further the negotiations process and the work of the administrations in this process, do you find it a beneficial change, a beneficial reform, or something that you should avoid?
Thanks, Milana, for those two questions, and thanks to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Secretariat for the invitation. From the Macedonian perspective, then, okay, we take the view of the frog. So Macedonia is actually the case that links what was once a functioning enlargement and what we experienced in the last decade, because it actually started its journey, and I really love thank you for starting with the journey metaphor. It started its journey with Croatia. In 2003,
20 years ago with the Thessaloniki summit. I had just returned from my Erasmus in Limerick, actually, in Ireland, where I was studying European politics. And the expectations were different. What you are mentioning in the second part of your question, that the accession negotiations would go on the basis of merit, this was the tone, this was the expectation, and this was something that we all hoped would bring this country closer to the Union. Unfortunately, we experienced a backlog even in that period with the start of the accession negotiations between 2005 and 2009 and the first recommendation. But this was the point when the EU's credibility was still, you could maintain it, and actually we did deliver on a lot of points. So I was here reminded by Ms. Marinda on Ms. Luca on the judiciary reform. Actually, the constitutional changes of North Macedonia in 2005 linked to the judiciary reform were linked to its candidate status. So we had examples of difficult constitutional changes, which were very much digested easily by this society and are not remembered as any type of a trauma. Sorry? We could have, yes, if we were smarter, but it is what it is, probably. So in that period, it was evident that this country could reciprocate. It was the same with the visa liberalization, roughly in 2009, when we were all, and even in that period, even Bosnia caught up with its police reform. So we could see that things were moving. This last decade, actually, will be probably the longest period in which the EU has not experienced enlargements since Croatia. I don't think we have a longer period in the European Union's history in which there has been no enlargement. So I think it's not a secret that probably we have lost capacity on this side, and in all fairness, probably the engagement on the EU side, also part of the European Commission, where the administration that needs to keep this wheel going has weakened. It's normal if you're not actually in the process. It's the reason why I left the Macedonian administration in 2011 was actually because we realized there was no process. That's it, and you can't move on there. So going back to the second part of the question, I think that's essential. Unless you actually have a process of accession negotiations going on a merit-based principle, I think it's going to be very difficult to maintain and do the work that was mentioned here, because all those people that are doing the work will feel that it's not valued. It's not for the medals, but it's for the fact that they actually got to deliver something. Probably many of my colleagues here share our joint exuberations from the 2009 visa liberalization process, because this was probably the only meaningful process in which we were in, and we could see what happened. And it was worth it, the 80 hours per week extra that we worked in a single month. So we said, this is good. We don't need, this is what happened, and we have a better system of issuing documents at the moment, and we have a lot of issues. Yes, I'm looking at your watch as well. I'll end by 5 minutes. So we know that actually this is an essential part of the process, and it's essential for Macedonia. But then usually when I do this very nice speech, the counterparts from the EU say, but this is always geopolitical, it's always been geopolitical, it's not the merit that much. But I think we have to keep the two going together, because otherwise, if we emphasize the geopolitical argument, we often think in this region, I'm 40 years old, 41 probably, so we think, are we not geopolitical enough, going back to what the Vice Prime Minister here started the discussion with. So on many levels, I think that these are the core elements which you pointed to, if we actually have a merit-based process, which, to be fair, we have benefited a lot, going back to, I think, Tanya's argument that we are doing the work for ourselves. We are the country that, without having started the accession negotiations, is comparably aligned with Serbia and Montenegro. And this is good for us. This is good for our food safety. This is good for the customs services that we get, and we're very proud of that and very grateful, actually, to many of the documents at the EU level, starting from the SAA, that have brought us to this stage. However, probably the limits of what we could do without the accession negotiations have been reached. I would have been happier if we had used this decade in a better way, but I don't think we did. So the accession negotiations are a needed push in this way based on the merit principles that you mentioned.
Thank you very much, Simonida. And I will now move to our youth representative in this panel, Ms. Almaslari. And I would like to ask your perspective on the role of young people in the accession process. On the one hand, young people stand to benefit the most and the longest from membership of the European Union, but at the same time, there is the overall feeling and understanding that young people are becoming less involved in politics. Their voices are simply not heard enough and not heard in the right ways, which are, let's say, convenient for young people. What should, in your opinion, the European Union on the one hand, but also the Western Balkan governments on the other hand, do to offer a stronger and more tailor-made role for young people to contribute to the accession process and the reforms? And it would be great if you could give us some examples.
Thank you, Milena, for your question, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today among you. I hope that through my answer I can shed some light on the important role that young people can play in the whole EU enlargement process. And also I want to do so by sharing a little bit of how we at the National Youth Congress of Albania work on this regard. The National Youth Congress of Albania is a youth umbrella organization that is committed to full and better involvement of young people in decision-making processes. We are now also part of the European Youth Forum, which is the biggest platform at the European Union level and European level in advocating and pushing forward for youth rights. We see supporting youth development as an integral part of the whole EU enlargement process. And what do we mean when we say youth development and socioeconomic growth? We mean I hope you can hear me now. Yeah. We see and economic growth. Thank you. I hope it is better now. Yeah. So we see youth development and support as an integral part of the EU enlargement process, and how we can concretely move towards that is through human investment into the human capital. I want to bring one example that was the biggest, largest endeavor of the National Youth Congress of Albania last year, which was the Tirana European Youth Capital title. This happened at the same time with the European Year of Youth initiative that was launched by the European Commission. We got many lessons learned from this experience, but 3 key points that I want to share with you today in this panel that are beneficial also to how we can involve youth and how we can have a multi-stakeholder approach towards the EU integration process are 3 key points I want to share with you. The first of all is that to implement the Tirana European Youth Capital title, we co-implemented and co-created this program with the municipality of Tirana and with the central government of Albania. Now, we are a civil society organization that advocates for youth rights and youth interest, and we sat down with representatives from our governments to come across the same terms and the same agreements on how we prioritize youth needs through this whole single year that is dedicated to them. And we know, as young people, that it is not always easy to get your voice heard on the tables where you are sitting with decision makers, because, of course, there are other high priority political issues they have on their agendas. And it's not always easy to agree on why we need to invest more and we need to allocate more budget for youth initiatives. But it proved to be successful for us. We, in the parallel time that we were co-designing and co-implementing this process and this title, we also sat down with young people to organize open consultations and to hear their voice and perspectives on what do they want to see in our agenda for the European Youth Capital title. And we came across 8 main themes that we implemented, and one of them was Youth Are Europeans. There is a large support for the European integration process in Albania. It's also a high important topic in our country's political agenda. And this program, dedicated only to EU values and young people from Albania coming across and coming together with their peers from the Western Balkan region, but also from the EU countries. They wanted to gather together to implement projects, initiatives, campaigns, and focus on digitalization, on green issues, on raising their concerns on what are the most priority topics for them. So we co-designed this program also with young people. We also followed a multi-stakeholder approach and included businesses and academia as well. And lastly, what was the 3rd key point that we got as a lesson learned from this initiative and this whole year was the importance of investing and dedicating certain budget for young people and youth issues. So when we sat with the municipality of Tirana and with the central government, we were clear on our requests and we got the support we needed in terms of financial means. Now, it's not always easy for the civil society in the Western Balkan countries and youth organizations to be part of the EU enlargement process without also having the mechanisms and the spaces to do so. And this also comes in line with the financial resources they need to get empowered. So these were like the three key main highlights we got from the whole journey of Tirana European Youth Capital. And to conclude, as a young person myself, I also wanted to add one reflection and one insight we got from this journey and from our constant work with youth. We need to share ownership. Many values and, thank you. Many values and desires that young people have when they see towards the European Union are based on the aspirations we share and on the values that we think that the European Union reflects for all of its citizens. But there is still a lot more work to do and a long way to go to include young people as partners of co-creating this enlargement process. They need to sit down on the tables with decision makers, their voices need to be heard, and they need to share ownership of this whole process, because both the challenges we share and the opportunities that we are about to unlock through this project, through this enlargement process, require a multi-stakeholder approach, and young people need to be co-partners of this journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I think that inviting and including young people in each panel in this conference is a very good first step in that direction, but certainly we need more of that. We have very little time, but still I want to get at least 2 or 3 questions from the audience, if there is interest, of course. Who would like to break the ice? Let's at least get 1 or 2 questions. I'm sure that this very stimulating discussion has encouraged at least some questions in the audience. There you go. Please introduce yourself. Who has the mics for the audience?
Hello everyone, so my name is Angel Petrov. I work for a Bulgarian news website. And as I've been listening to this discussion, and as today the German parliament has been discussing this, or will discuss this resolution, which is not just about North Macedonian identity as it's being discussed here. It also touches an issue about enlargement reform, about the issue of changing the methodology, which is of course another discussion, but since you've discussed the geopolitics, the reforms needed for enlargement, if we assume that tomorrow morning the EU opens the floor to all Western Balkan countries, partially joining, like with certain rights limited, or a gradual integration, depending on what is decided. 2 questions stem from that. First of all, do you think our countries, your countries, are ready for this? And secondly, meaning reform-wise, politically, geopolitically, economically, and secondly, is this the death of enlargement as we see it, as we know it until now?
Thank you very much. Is the question addressed to a specific panelist or whoever would like to pick up?
Well, whoever would like to pick up. I would be particularly curious about Mr. Maricic, given he is the senior most official here representing the Republic of North Macedonia, so it will be interesting to hear his take, but whoever else wants to.
Since we don't have much time, I would actually encourage each panelist to give a very short reply, very crisp, like half a minute. Are we ready if the reform of the enlargement process is to be adopted tomorrow?
Yeah, I would be as short as possible. Yes, we are ready, and the screening process is actually showing that there are many areas in which we can jump in quicker than expected. Of course, there are some other areas that we need more time. Is this the end of the enlargement? Only if we decide so, and only if the member states decide so. But I don't think that should be a priority. To the contrary, I think that this kind of an approach, a new approach, gives new quality of relations and opens the door for quicker enlargement for some countries. But that doesn't pushes the groups. It doesn't makes, that somebody should wait for somebody else. I don't think anybody should wait at some point for somebody else. It will depend, because at the end of the day, it always depends on our personal performance. But that might become more fair than the current situation, but there are a lot of details that we need to work on in order to make it really a fair system for the candidate countries and a fair system for the member states.
Thank you, Brian. Who would like to offer the next? You can take mine, everybody can take
okay. So we will end up with one mic. So if I understood, I think that I understood the question a little bit different than Boyan. So I understood the question that if we are ready for less than a full-fledged membership. No, we are not for this.
No, then I didn't get the question.
Okay.
Then so, no, we're not ready for anything less than that.
So I know that we will agree on this. We discuss a lot about this. We are not ready for staged membership, but we are ready for phase-in, which means accelerated integration within the region, but also within the single market. And that is basically what if I understood properly, was the suggestion by Mrs. von der Leyen. And that is what we supposed to sit and discuss further. There is no other way but full-fledged membership for all of us.
Thank you, Tanya. As a moderator, maybe I can abuse my position just to flag one important point, that even in those suggested reforms of the enlargement policy, such as the gradual or staged accession, the ultimate objective is always full membership. Only a treaty revision can invent something that falls short of full membership. Not at all, but we can bring that discussion outside for the coffee break.
I can step in a bit.
Yes, please do.
It will bring the process to the next stage. Why should we talk about stopping somewhere? Just moving forward. So we talk about enlargement, we'll start to talk about inclusion, we'll talk about disparities and parities, and so on and so further. So I would twist a bit your question. So if the question is, are we ready to step into changing our lives by converging more, increasing living standards, so do enlargement in practice rather than just in paper, with all due respect for papers, I'm a lawyer, I love them, then the answer is yes.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
I really believe, my dear Balkaners, that all of you are sure that you deserve full membership, and I agree with you, you do. On the other hand, I think the phased integration, which is now some brand new proverb we are using, is the way, and it is the light at the end of the tunnel what I spoke about, because I think as long you are not fully able to be a full members, I guess the best way is to step by step to integrate in communication, in energy support, whatever. There are many, many different areas in which we could collaborate and take you, potential new members, as a full members even now. So this is, for me, the hope what I was speaking about, and maybe the instrument which we should believe in. It's just by the beginning, but I wish all of you the full membership. On the other hand, even now in EU, we don't have equal membership for everyone. Some of us are using euro, some of us not. And also the... By choice and assessment. Yeah, but it's by choice, but we have to say we are equal, but some of us are more equal. And it could be in the future. There was a debate about multi-speed Europe in the future. So I was not take this full membership as the only one solution, even if I believe you deserve it.
Thank you very much. Simonida.
I find it, with the 20 and 30 years that we mentioned, I find it very difficult to imagine the scenario when tomorrow this happens. But so that's, I think that I'm a bit of a realist. But I think on that side, the ball is in the European Union's court to actually devise where they're going to be able to phase these countries in and how, because I don't think that this can come specifically from the region. So it won't be tomorrow, but hopefully it will be very soon.
Thank you, Simonida. Is there anybody else who would like to come in? We have like Well, we're actually 2 minutes past the end of the panel, so if nobody else has a pressing urge and need to intervene, I would like to thank you all for your very substantive, very interesting contributions, for staying in time limits, which was not easy to manage such a large panel, which was late 20 minutes. So thank you very much. Thank you to the audience for listening, and I wish you a very nice afternoon and the rest of the conference. Thank you.